Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. 12 years ago, I interviewed poet and nonfiction writer Honor Moore about the socially committed but sexually complicated life of her father, Paul Moore, the celebrated Episcopal Bishop of New York. Now she's written a memoir about her mother, Jenny McKean Moore, who battled the Victorian strictures placed on the women of her generation to become a more modern woman. Our Revolution, A Mother and Daughter at Mid-Century, is published by W. Norton and Company. Welcome.
Hello, it's so nice to see you again.
You have written about your maternal grandmother, who was a very accomplished painter. You've written about your father, who was a nationally known social activist, Episcopal bishop. Why did you decide to write about your mother, who some people might regard as primarily a mother and a bishop's wife?
Well, to me, my mother was a writer who didn't get a chance to have her full career because she had 9 children. She became an activist along with my father. And then at the age of 45, she published a nonfiction book, a memoir called The People on 2nd Street, which came out in 1968 and sold 25,000 copies and had her traveling all over the country. And she began to come into her own. I have the chapter in the book about that part of her life is called First Person Singular. And I found this sheet of paper toward the end of my research in which she wrote, "I have always been we, and now I am an I."
Both your parents were from wealthy WASP backgrounds. We're talking about lavish homes, country estates, horse riding, prep schools, Ivy League and 7 sister colleges, debutante seasons, myriad social contacts. How did they meet, and what do you think was the attraction?
They actually first met, this is kind of a very WASP thing, but they first met at dog trials on the lawn of my mother's parents' house. My mother's parents raised the first Afghan hounds in the United States, and they had little shows on the front lawn. So that's where they first met when they were children. And then apparently they ran into each other in a Vermont drugstore sometime in their teens. And then eventually during the summer of 1941, they were part of a group. There were 4 of them. They hung out and partied all summer. And although my mother was the girlfriend of the other man in the group. And then eventually she wrote him a letter, and he was in the Marines at Guadalcanal. And then he was wounded and almost died and came back to New York to recuperate. And they met sort of among their circle of friends and started and quote unquote fell in love. I mean, they actually did fall in love. I say quote unquote.
Eventually.
And I say sort of from the cynical, 74-year-old's point of view. They were in a cafe and their hands touched and they both felt electricity. So.
But I think it was a 2.5-year courtship or about that.
Yeah.
Of Jenny McKean and Paul Moore was
McKean, no L.
McKean was difficult. It was off and on. It was sometimes long distance. He broke it off several times. They would date other people. Your mother seemed to be the pursuer. Some people might say in a previous time that she set her cap for him. What do you think it was that drew her to him?
Well, first of all, I think any courtship would be difficult that was carried on entirely by correspondence, by letters. They went out for 3 months. Then he chose to do a Marine Corps posting in Seattle rather than New Haven, which would have been close to her. In typical male fashion, he felt that he was not ready to make a commitment to marry. And then she was brokenhearted. She considered that a breakup, and she went out with a lot of other people. There was no shortage. She was a very beautiful girl, and there was no shortage of boyfriends. And then actually, I think that he initiated the resumption of the correspondence. And they corresponded, and then they got so turned on by their real, what they had in their 3 months of actual dating was a real ability to have intimate conversation, to really talk about their feelings. And they both came from sort of old-fashioned, repressed families and difficult families in different ways. And they were able to talk about that. And he was able to talk about the war and how that felt. And, you know, eventually, eventually the most interesting thing actually is that he had had a conversion experience to the Episcopal Church when he was 16. And he had always said, you know, Jenny, you should really try the church. She had grown up in a non-churchy family. And she did that. And oddly enough, the kind of vocabulary of spiritual sharing that she discovered in the church enabled the two of them to move their conversation to a more serious and conscious of the world outside them place. And I think they shared that.
You write that religion played the role that psychotherapy might have played if they were dating today.
Yeah, that's what I felt. I don't mean that, you know, going to confession is like going to a therapist, but I just mean there was suddenly a vocabulary to talk about one's inner life.
Early on, when Paul was in seminary, they're young marrieds, he's in seminary, they and two young priests at the seminary they actually asked to be sent as a group to an inner city church that was dying. Where did this drive to serve the poor and oppressed come from? Because it didn't come from their families.
Well, I think one has to think of the moment, the post-war moment in the United States when everybody had some idea about wanting to save the world from doing this again, from having another world war. And my parents, when he was at seminary and she was, you know, taking divinity school classes up at Union Seminary at the same time, they came in contact with a woman named Dorothy Day, who with her group, the Catholic Worker Group, published a paper called The Catholic Worker. And they were very interested in serving the poor. There was a whole kind of world of, you know, there were the French worker priests in France. There were the Anglican priests who worked at the docks in England. And Dorothy Day worked in, you know, the Bowery, downtown, the Lower East Side. And she came and spoke to them when they were at seminary, and they were inspired by her.
It was sort of this idea of living your religion or living Christianity.
That's right. So, you know, and the deep background was the social gospel, the idea that, you know, the church was not an ivory tower, but, you know, if you're going to think about Jesus Christ serving the poor, then why aren't you serving the poor?
Right.
And
so they go off to Grace Church, a basically dying church in Jersey City.
mm-hmm.
What was your mother's life like there? And what kind of impact do you think she had on the people they served and vice versa?
Well, for one thing, I did not realize until I wrote The Bishop's Daughter, and then even more deeply writing this book, that she didn't go just as my father's wife. She went as a member of the team. So there were 4 of them. And I mean, the kind of feminism idea, your consciousness later on would say, yes, she was the 4th in the team, but she also did all the cooking and, you know, cooked the soup for the men who came to the door and so on and so forth. So she had double duty. And I think that they had a kind of collective imagination about how to come into a place like that, and that they learned as they went along that what they wanted to do was to become part of the community, not to be the white people, you know, bestowing whatever they had on poorer people who were mostly people of color, but to live in the community. And that's what they plan to do. And to my, you know, you always think, oh God, that has to be over idealized. But I went back to Grace Church and I met all these women my age, at that point, my late 60s, early 70s, who had been my girlfriends when we were at Jersey City. And the portrait that they paint is very close. I mean, it's the portrait of what they, my parents and Myers and Pegram had decided to do. So,
Okay.
yeah.
The question that your mother was asked, probably more than any other question, was, why did she decide to have 9 children? And do you think she ever felt any conflict between the huge job of being a minister's wife and being a mother of 9 and having a vocation of her own?
Well, that was sort of, I always think that because the two of them were brought up with, in, as you put it, lavish houses with, you know, nurses and maids and cooks and kitchen help, that my mother really didn't understand what was involved in having 9 children. And then she got into it, and there was the, you know, there's the cliche that some women become addicted to having children. So I think that she loved babies. She loved having children. And she was fascinated by trying to organize who we would become, you know, sending one to trumpet. She had me having trumpet lessons when I was like 11 years old. I did not pursue the trumpet. But so, and she always said she wanted to have a baseball team, 9, or a small orchestra. I mean, that was her joking way of putting it. Interestingly, throughout their letters, my mother bequeathed me all these letters and unfinished writing of hers. I found all these references to how many children they might have, and it was never 5 or 6. It was always 8 or 9. I mean, it was odd. It wasn't that they said, "Oh, let's have 9 children." It was sort of, well, you know, when you have 8 children when they're broken up, he says, well, when you'll have 8 children with somebody else, I will. You know, it was odd. I mean, it was, so it was, then the most interesting thing, I mean, one of my more interesting theories, I thought, is that this was a girl who had won blue ribbons in horse shows, dog shows, horse races, you know, straight A's, Phi Beta Kappa. So she was a competitor.
So she was a competitor in having babies as well.
Yeah, it was the baby boom. Everyone was having 5 or 6. I'm going to have 9.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the family,
so there's a lot of elements.
Okay.
To it.
After, I think it was 9 years in Jersey City. Was it 9?
It was more like 7. Yeah.
7. The family moved to Indianapolis, where Paul had been named dean of the Episcopal Cathedral there. And then from there, they moved to Washington, D.C., where he had been elected suffragan bishop at the National Cathedral. Obviously, the Jersey City experience was very profound for them. But your mother seemed to have an easier time in Indianapolis and in Washington.
I'm not sure that she had an easier time in Indianapolis. She did have some postpartum depressions there and so on, but she was able to have more help, more household help. And the house was big. The house that they were given by the church had, you know, 7 bathrooms. And in Jersey City, we had 1.5 bathrooms.
Wow.
And, you know, 3 or 4 of us in a room. And then by the time we got to Indianapolis, there were no more toddlers and babies, you know.
Right.
So
everybody,
easier. Yeah. So my no sooner was my sister in nursery school than my mother began writing her book. It's as if she read The Feminine Mystique in 1963. 1964, when they were finally settled in Washington, everybody was in school, and she went across the street to a friend's empty dining room and wrote a book in 3 years.
Okay. A turning point in your mother's life came when she became aware that your father was bisexual. He had, in fact, been having affairs with men throughout, and some women throughout their marriage. How did she discover it?
First of all, he did not have affairs with other women during their marriage. Second of all, it's not entirely clear how she discovered it. I think that she just, and it's what I say in the book, is that it became clear to her sometime in 1969 after we were in Washington. And, but she never spoke to me about it. She confided in only 3 friends, and she never confronted my father about it. So it didn't become a big, I mean, it was a huge issue in her life, but it did not become a big issue in the family, in part because the same year that she discovered that, she had a near fatal automobile accident and was in the hospital for 2 months and almost died. And then we moved back to New York, and then it was too much for her, and she became, completely exhausted and devastated, just worn out. And
was she just sort of physically worn out, or was she emotionally devastated by this revelation that she had?
Well, I'm sure she was emotionally devastated by the revelation, but she had made a decision to move to New York with him and stay in the marriage. And I think that became untenable to her after a certain point.
You describe her as being heroic in not letting these secrets of your father, not revealing them to her children, and in not confronting him about it, but just dealing with it. You use the word heroic.
I use the word heroic because I'm not sure I would have done the same thing, and I'm not sure it was the best thing for her to do, and I'm not sure that if she had lived, I think things would have gone differently. But as it was, I think she was protecting him, and she was protecting him and protecting his relationship with his children. He was a wonderful, he was a very busy father, but he had wonderful fatherly qualities and we all adored him. And I think that she was not wanting to interfere with that. And in that sense, I thought it was heroic.
The title of your book is Our Revolution. What was the revolution for you, and what was the revolution for your mother?
I'm glad you see that those are the revolutions. My mother, I think there are several revolutions in the book. One is my mother's coming into her own, coming out of the we and becoming a writer. The revolution for me was finding my own vocation as a writer and my identity as a woman through the early years of feminism, beginning in 1969. Also, we had all as a family lived through the civil rights movement and the peace movement. And so it was in our values to be open to change. And the third revolution, which is the one that I really discovered in writing the book, is the revolution in a relationship, in our relationship, going from mother-daughter to 2 women. And I refer to the Doris Lessing phrase, free women, sort of stumbling into our own identities and trying to have a relationship. And the loss of the book, of my life with my mother, was that we didn't get to really live that third revolution as women together.
But you did come to understand her better as you...
Well, we came to understand each other better. And a stunning thing was my discovery of the correspondence. In correspondence, I thought I knew that we had really negotiated a new relationship, and we had made amends for our rather difficult and conflicted and you know, tantrum bound you know, my teenagehood and, you know, the mother-daughter stuff. We'd made amends for that, and we were going to a new place.
Certainly for a mother of 9, a bishop's wife, an activist who was very much involved in movements of that time. 600 people came to her funeral. So obviously she had an impact on a lot of people aside from being Paul Moore's wife.
Yes, she did. She was Jenny, and it's amazing how many emails and Facebook posts and so on I've gotten. People very happy to have her back, you know, very happy to, you know, including some of my siblings, you know, having her alive again. My one sister said, I have my mother back, you know, and that's what I felt. I have my mother back, you know, and she was funny and she was beautiful and she was smart and, you know, she was a compelling person.
And she seemed like, you know, the perfect bishop's wife. I mean, she was charming. She knew how to entertain people. She had lots of friends. I would imagine that a lot of people would have regarded them as the perfect couple, even though no.
Definitely.
Couple. Yes, yes.
Definitely they did.
If you had to describe your mother and sum up your mother in, say, 2 paragraphs, what would you say about her?
Oh, Sheryl.
You can do that.
I wrote 600 pages. 2 paragraphs. One of my sisters says she was a truth teller. Another friend said she was in Jersey City, said she was the person in the meeting who would bring up the deepest conflict that was going on. She would get right to the heart of it. Get right to the heart of the matter. She was a wonderfully attractive looking person, and she was also someone who really was interested in other people, and that's the aspect of her that made her, you know, that was her great gift as a mother, was seeing all of us for the individual people that we were, you know, and taking some of us to hear the Beatles at their first U.S. concert, you know, when, you know, they weren't the Beatles yet. So she was sort of, one might say, hip. People say, I still run into people to say, oh, I stayed at your house during the mobilization and the war in Vietnam. I slept in a, you know, sleeping bag on the living room floor, and your mother made coffee in the morning, and, you know, there were signs all over the house. And, you know, she was larger than life in a way. And she, you know, and she loved life, and she loved people. And in addition, there was something uniquely herself about her, which is what carried me through writing the book and wanting to tell her story and my story.
I hope you got my message about a passage from the book that I
did.
So why don't you read that?
Okay. When I started writing this book, your book, I asked for your help, and you gave it to me. In the writing you left, confiding everything I wanted to know. And as I wrote, I felt you falling away from my old ideas of you, my overemphasis on your sadness and discouragement. My loss of you released itself like an old skin. Isn't it strange that it's taken so long, all the way into my 70s, for me to feel that I am finally your daughter, prepared to inherit what you offered, stumbling as you did toward what I so awkwardly wanted all these years, to accept how you lived, how you kept changing, to understand that each new phase of your life was not a static place like a step on an old Currier and Ives Life and Age of Woman print, but one chrysalis of many, from which you kept emerging.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'd like to thank Honor Moore for bringing us the story of her mother and for joining us today. Her memoir, Our Revolution, A Mother and Daughter at Mid-Century, is published by W.W. Norton and Company for the City University of New York and One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy.